Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to wait a couple of minutes for folks to continue to sign into the meeting. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today to hear about the next 5-year update to the Lower West Coast Water Supply Plan. My name is Tom Coleos. I'm the Water Supply Planning Section Lead at the district, and I'll be the moderator for today's third stakeholder workshop. This Zoom meeting is being recorded, and within a few days, the recording will be made available to the public on the district's YouTube page. The presentations you see here today have been posted to the district's Lower West Coast Water Supply Plan webpage if you want to view them again. The stakeholder workshop is going to have two main presentations. First, we're going to have Jeff Pearson, the Utility Director for the City of Cape Coral, talk about the city's plan for continued expansion of their reuse program and other aspects of their utility. Then Bob Verastro, the Lower West Coast Plan Manager, will go through the components of the draft plan that was posted last week for public review. Then I'll finish up with our next steps in the planning process. Under the Zoom format, all attendees are muted. However, we still want to hear from you. We will have a question and comment period after each presentation, so please hold your questions until the end of the presentations. Your comments and thoughts are critical to ensure the 2022 plan update addresses your issues and concerns. So I encourage you to share those with us today, and please provide written comments on the draft documents. So just some overview information for you all. If you've attended the other stakeholder meetings, you've seen some of these slides, but just as a refresher, and for those people who missed the first two meetings. Water supply plan requirements shown here are a result of legislation that was passed in late 1990s, requiring water supply plans to have all of these elements in the water supply plans. Demand estimates and projections for a 20-year period, source options, resource analyses, and identification of issues. The district has been divided into 5 planning areas as indicated on the map, basically around drainage basins. The development of plans for every region is staggered since the same planning team works on each one, and the dates on the map represent when the next update for that region is due to be completed. As you can see on the graphic, Lake Okeechobee touches 4 of our planning areas. However, Lake Okeechobee is formally included and addressed in the Lower East Coast Water Supply Plan, which will be updated next year. And this planning horizon for this Lower West Coast Plan update is 2020 through 2045. Now just a quick overview of what a regional water supply plan will do and what it will not do. Simply speaking, a water supply plan is a proactive approach towards water supply. We know there will be increased needs for water in the future and potential shortfalls. So water supply plans provide a roadmap to let us get ahead of those demands by identifying sources and strategies now on how those demands will be met, while still meeting the needs of our natural resources. What a plan does not do, it doesn't authorize consumptive use permits. It does not establish MFLs. Those are adopted by rule. However, the MFL prevention and recovery strategies are included in the water supply plans. For public participation, throughout the planning process, we look for multiple opportunities for public engagement with governing board updates, Big Cypress Basin board updates, and stakeholder workshops like we're having here today. The full plan and appendices have been posted to our planning webpage on August 25th for public review. Again, please provide your written comments to Bob Verastro by October 5th for our consideration. We'll have his email and the webpage at the end of the presentation for y'all to jot down. Now, just a quick review of where we are in the water supply plan update timeline. Obviously, it's September 1st, and we're at the third stakeholder meeting. The public comment period is going to end in about a month, October 5th. We'll go to the Big Cypress Basin Board and have a second meeting October 27th, and then our governing board approval November 10th. That will be held in Naples. As a result of the governing board being held in Naples on November 10th, we are foregoing a presentation of the draft plan at the September governing board meeting, which was our original plan timeline. At this time, I'll go over some quick housekeeping items. After completion of each presentation, we will have these instructions shown here for providing comments and questions. I think we have a lot of participants, so we ask you to try to limit your comments to around 3 minutes, although we certainly have some flexibility there. I think that's all I have. If Jeff Pearson from the City of Cape Coral is online with us and ready to proceed with his presentation, Henry, I think you might have to unmute him so he could go through his presentation. That's Jeff Pearson.
Can you hear me?
Yes, Jeff, we can hear you. Thank you, sir. Go ahead.
All right. Thank you very much for allowing me the opportunity to share with everyone some of the initiatives that the City of Cape Coral is currently undertaking as it relates to reclaimed water supplementation and expansion. Please, next slide. If you don't already know, City of Cape Coral, of course, we're located near the city of Fort Myers. The city is the third largest Florida city in land area. And I just found out this morning we're the 8th largest in population now. So I'll need to update that, not 10th. We're moving up to number 8. As you can see from our population, we've more than doubled in the past 20 years or so, and we're currently hovering a little bit above 200,000, which it's my understanding we recently have overtaken the city of Tallahassee, which is the capital of Florida. Our build-out population is around 400,000 people. Next slide. Some of the drivers for the adoption of reclaimed water in our area is mainly because of the fact that, we don't have a fresh aquifer We don't have an aquifer like over on the East Coast, such as the Biscayne. And what the aquifers we do have, especially the shallower ones, have a lower yield. We were overtaxing our water resources that we did have. We had threats of saltwater intrusion. At the time, before the reclaimed water system really took off, we only were serving a small part of the city. Our water treatment plants were reaching capacity. We had deteriorating surface water quality. We were being threatened with fines for our wastewater disposal by discharging it into surface water bodies. We were being threatened with a building moratorium, and we were experiencing continued rapid growth. Next slide. Some of the, this is a graph on the left showing what the water levels were, elevation in the aquifer before we started really doing our major utility expansion areas. And the graph on the right is one of the USGS wells that I'll show you in a later slide. And it was just continuing to decline. Next slide. Some of the reasons why the city went to a widespread reclaimed water system was, of course, the limited water resources that were available. We wanted to focus on total water management. We considered all the water sources and all of our demands. We wanted to eliminate wastewater surface discharges. And as we all know, up to 50% of municipal demands really nationwide are used for non-potable uses such as irrigation of landscaping and lawns. We're blessed to have 300 miles of freshwater canals and 100 miles of brackish water canals. Of those freshwater canals, we looked at those as a resource, but not to use for our drinking water system. We're a pre-platted residential community, which has a number of challenges, if you will, whenever you're growing as a city. Of course, we have minimal industry and agriculture base because we've always kind of traditionally been known as a bedroom community of Fort Myers. So we had a lot of challenges, and there were a lot of things that we were considering the city did when they started the program. Next slide. Some of the things that we wanted to do also were to separate the inside and outside uses of water. We wanted to reserve the reverse osmosis treated brackish groundwater just exclusively for potable uses or domestic uses inside the home. We wanted to use our reuse, which is our treated wastewater, primarily, for outdoor irrigation. And we wanted to utilize the 300 miles of freshwater canals, which is basically harvesting stormwater that is stored in those canals to supplement our reuse. We installed 3 pipes to every house and continue to do so. One, of course, water, wastewater, and irrigation quality water. We also have implemented demand management by only allowing 2-day per week year-round watering restrictions. And most of course, a residential home gets to water 4 hours on each of those 2 days per week. Next slide. Some of the lessons learned with this large reclaim system that we have to the residential level is that we needed to add more storage for our freshwater canal system. So we raised some of our weirs with adjustable weirs to provide added storage, and also we can lower them for flood control during major rain events. We also interconnected the canal system from other basins because the city's over 100 square miles. So where it's raining in one area of the city, we're able to move that water into other basins where we have 6 canal pump stations that we pump out of the freshwater canals to supplement our reclaimed water system. And then, of course, on the stormwater side and protecting the estuary, we use that water rather than it going over the weirs to the brackish water that's tied into the estuary. So we hold that water back and we actually use it and not discharge it, because as we all know, too much fresh water is not good for an estuary. We try to balance that the best we can, and and try to continue a program of total water management. Next slide. Here's the graph that the continued graph of the one I showed earlier. This is USGS well L581. It's it's south of Pine Island Road in the southern part of Cape Coral. As you can see, back in after we installed our central potable lines and our reclaimed lines, we started to see the water levels in the aquifers start to come back in the sandstone aquifer. This is basically a plot in figure 5 there on the right-hand side of the slide. So you can see as we've done that, it doesn't happen immediately. It takes several years, but the aquifer does actually, in fact, recover because a lot of the private wells are not being used for as much as for their domestic use. So it's been a really good program. So basically what we've tried to do is we've eliminated our wastewater discharges. We have not discharged to the Caloosahatchee River since October of 2008 from our 2 water reclamation facilities. There's been a major reduction in per capita use of our using, expensive drinking water. And we've extended the useful life of our 2 reverse osmosis low pressure brackish RO plants by probably 20 years. We've deferred future capital improvements by not having to build larger RO plants and depleting the aquifer. And of course, with a reclaimed water system, there are exemptions during droughts for outdoor irrigation if you have that type of system. However, our system has matured to the point that we do not exercise those exemptions, and also because we combine it with the canal water. Next slide. Our system, we continue to garner recognition for our progressive water management program. We're essentially 100% alternative water supply because we use brackish groundwater to make our potable drinking water, and we reuse our municipal wastewater and supplement that with our canal water. During the dry season, our demands are in excess of 40 million gallons a day. And we have, as I was speaking earlier, we have had some major reductions in discharges of stormwater to the estuary. And one of the silver linings of this program has been that we have not had any rate increases since about 2012, 2013 timeframe. But we are getting to the point, because of our continued expansion program and the current economy, some of the supply chain issues and the inflation, we are going to implement a 3% annual increase beginning next fiscal year. Next slide. Also, with our financial management, we try to keep that in check. Some of the key parameters that we look at as a utility are that we target 6 months of annual O&M expenses in our reserves and debt coverage. And we target net revenues of at least 1.5 times, excuse me, annual or senior debt service. And we also try to manage manageable levels of debt. Our goal is no additional long-term borrowing over the next 10 years, except for our UEP. But that may change depending on availability of SRF funding, because we're hearing that the SRF program is going to be reduced. So we probably will have to do some additional borrowing. And also, hopefully in the future, there may be an opportunity where we could pay down existing debt as that debt becomes redeemable. Next slide. Here's a graph that our rate consultant provided to us. This is the United States Consumer Price Index for water and sewer. And as you can see, the blue line is the city of Cape Coral. Since 2011, we've only had about a 17% increase. And while everyone else has pretty much been at about 53%. So I believe that's a testament to having a reclaimed water system, because I would imagine if we were supplying all of our water through our RO plants, we would probably be on that higher level of the scale, cumulative increases, and more consistent with the US CPI. Next slide. Here's a residential utility bill comparison with the city of Cape Coral and our neighbors. We're hovering just a smidgen under $100 a month for a residential customer, using approximately 4,000 to 5,000 gallons of water and 20,000 gallons of irrigation water per month. Next slide. Some of our reuse initiatives that we're working on are, in the recent past, we struck an agreement with the Florida Governmental Utility Authority that operates the North Fort Myers wastewater plant for a reclaimed water interconnect. That interconnect was placed into operation about 2 years ago. And we have another agreement with the city of Fort Myers, where we are underway with construction to build a 24-inch fusible PVC main under the Caloosahatchee River. It's parallel with the Midpoint Bridge or Veterans Bridge, or Colonial if you're on the Fort Myers side. We're going to, that agreement requires the city of Fort Myers to provide up to 6 million gallons a day for 7 months, and up to 12 million gallons a day if they have the water available. We've continued an aggressive utilities extension program. Our next area is North 1, which is north of Pine Island Road, to the western side, closer to the Burnt Store area, where it's a sensitive environmental area because you're closer to the water. And we're going to be adding about 3,000 additional customers. That project should be done by 2025. This year, City Council passed a new outdoor watering schedule that actually reduced. We've got our watering schedule is based on the last number of the address, 0 through 9. So you basically have 10 watering slots. Tuesday used to be a non-watering day. We added that as a day, and we added an additional time, which is 8 p.m. to midnight. Our prior schedule was limited to 6 days a week, from midnight to 8 a.m. to reduce evapotranspiration, watering only at night. And we added a total of 20 watering spots. So now we can distribute that demand over more time. And we actually reduced it about 40% on any given time slot. So that keeps pressures up, makes everyone happy. Their sprinkler heads pop open and do a better job and are more efficient. We're currently working on a comprehensive irrigation ordinance that will regulate automatic sprinkler systems to achieve a minimum of 70% efficiency. We want to do that soon, since we are only about 50% build out. That will further make our system more efficient. And also it will allow residents that have a smart controller to, they won't have to worry about getting a ticket from our code enforcement for illegal watering violations. As you can see from the graph on the right, we have excess demand during the dry season, January through May, or really December through May. And then we have excess supply during the wet season. So the key to our system is storage, and we're working on, I'll speak later about that. Next slide. Here's our map of our utility extension program schedule. North 1 is going to be our next area. And then North 3, 4, 5, 6, all the way through 12 through 2045. And we've got some private developers, Hudson Creek and the Pine Island corridor. We're going to be probably doing that as an in-house project where we're going to be extending water, sewer, and possibly irrigation to those areas as well. Next slide. Here's basically some of for each of the areas, the number of ERUs, the total number of build out ERUs, percentage developed UEP septic density, just some fun facts there. Next slide. These are now to speak about some of our projects recently completed or underway. This project is the Southwest Reuse Tank Project and Pump Station. This project was completed during the month of July. The South Florida Water Management District was gracious enough to award us $1.7 million in grant funding. This project adds 2 5 million gallon Crom tanks, and these tanks are state-of-the-art. They actually collect rainwater on the roof, and they can fill the tanks from the rainwater. Next slide. This is the Fort Myers River Crossing project. We call it the Caloosahatchee Connect. That's our marketing name of the project. Basically, on the city of Fort Myers side, we're tying into a line that the city of Fort Myers is currently constructing from their South Advanced Wastewater Treatment Facility. And that project will be a subaqueous crossing. It'll go down about 100 feet below the Caloosahatchee River, and then come back up at an exit point at Horton Park on the Cape Coral side. And the upland portion of the pipeline will go to our Everest water reclamation facility and tie into 2 existing 5 million gallon tanks, or be diverted directly into the city's reclaimed water system. That project is about $22.5 million. So far, we've received in excess of $10 million in grant funding, and we anticipate completion of this project about this time next year. Next slide. Another initiative that we're working on is a reservoir pipeline and pump station. The engineering cost is about $820,000. So far, we've received about $1.5 million in grants. I believe we're also, we should be completing the engineering by next month. We hope to bid the project later this year and complete the project by March of 2024 or earlier. One of the intervening variables with this is we still have to, we're working on an agreement, long-term agreement with the owner of this reservoir. Next slide. Weir 29 project. This is a new weir that prior to installing this new weir, the water was just going out of the system through 2 large pipes, and we put in a weir. We worked with Lee County. They constructed a new pond at the Yellow Fever Creek future park site, and they're going to help with nutrient reduction in Yellow Fever Creek. They'll be able to, there'll be some residence time in the new reservoir that they built at Yellow Fever Creek, and we will be working with them in conjunction with when water needs to be discharged and when it needs to be held back for storage. So it's a great partnership with Lee County and the city of Cape Coral to accomplish a number of goals, which is nutrient reduction in the river and water supply with the city of Cape Coral. And of course, it adds a nice water feature to the new park that's going to be under construction soon. Next slide. I'm available for any questions that anyone may have at this time. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you, Jeff. That was a nice presentation. We appreciate you sharing the information about your utility.
You're welcome.
If anybody wants to ask Mr. Pearson any questions or have any comments about his presentation, here are the instructions.
We have one hand raised, Jim Harpin.
Hey, thanks for calling on me. Yeah, my name is Jim Harpin, and I'm with Puritas Remote Sensing in Toledo. And what we do is we take certain types of satellite data and run it through our algorithms and make determinations. Our representative for the MENA region, Middle East and Northern Africa, and please stop me if this question was answered, but I don't think it was. In a couple of the countries over there, particularly Qatar or Qatar, depending on how you want to pronounce it, and Bahrain, they do something that really seems sort of unappetizing or perhaps either or unhygienic, but they take the effluent from their wastewater treatment plants and actually replenish the aquifers for pretty much all uses. I think they're doing it in the Emirates as well, but my guy over there was Sam. He knows particularly Bahrain and Qatar. Is this something that you've explored or would even be desirable?
Well, in the state of Florida, we have reclaimed water ASR wells. So actually, but they're not used. I don't think we can use them for it. Basically, then it would be indirect potable reuse, but there is a big push right now for direct and indirect potable reuse. Probably not just in Florida, but all over the United States. Out west, they're already doing it. Mainly direct potable reuse, but indirect potable reuse is something that is being looked at. I don't know what the current legislation and regulations are for that, but I do know that we have reclaimed water, aquifer storage and recovery wells where wastewater systems will treat the raw wastewater to a certain nutrient level removal and all of that and disinfection, and then they inject that water into an aquifer and then they pull it back out for irrigation uses. But I'm not aware of anyone using it again for drinking water yet, but I may be wrong.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
All right. Next, John Casani.
Hey, good afternoon. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Thank you. I think you mentioned on slide, I think it was 16, that the city had accomplished major stormwater reductions to receiving waters. I'm aware that the city still intends to remove the Chiquita Lock, which would remove about 700 acres of stormwater treatment area, create a direct discharge to the already impaired Caloosahatchee River. Similarly, in the northwest spreader, increased impervious area from increased development in that area west of Burnt Store Road that would appear to be increasing stormwater discharge directly to Matlacha Pass State Aquatic Preserve. So I'm wondering if you're suggesting a net decrease in stormwater discharge, and how are you accomplishing that?
Well, I think the ones you're talking about are the saltwater canals, which we do have 100 miles of saltwater canals. The ones I'm referring to are the freshwater canals that we have weirs that I'm not aware of us removing any of those weirs to keep the freshwater in because we actually use that as a resource. I really haven't been that involved in the removal of the lock, and I can't speak to that. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm just wondering out loud, with the city's growth rate, how are you reducing stormwater discharge into the freshwater canal system?
We're actually using that water because whenever it rains, of course, in the areas where there's a freshwater canal, that water drains into the canal. We're using the last numbers I saw, we used over, if you combined all of from the wastewater plants and the reservoir, which the canals which supply over 2/3 of all our water during the dry season. That water is combined is over 8 billion gallons a year. So all the canals, the freshwater canals combined only hold about 2 billion gallons. So, I mean, do the math. We're using 3 or 4 times the storage of what those canals can hold. So, of course, during the rainy season, we can't use all that water. So certainly there's fresh water that goes over the weirs, but that happens everywhere. So, but I think we're doing a lot to protect the environment.
Thank you.
Anyone else have any other questions? You can *9 to raise your hand. Or if you're calling in, it's *6 to mute or unmute your telephone. Don't see any other hands raised. So I think we'll move on. Next on the agenda, we have Bob Verastro, who's going to give us a summary of the draft 2022 Lower West Coast Plan Update. Go ahead.
Next slide. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. It's Bob Verastro, and just wanted to call your attention to the documents that we're going to talk about today. At the website, we've got our draft Lower West Coast Water Supply Plan and the supporting appendices all in one document, and it's searchable by bookmarks on the web page. So we certainly are encouraging everyone to take a look at that plan to provide us comments over the upcoming month. In addition to the plan itself, I do want to call your attention to the support document, which we have prepared. And that document actually is a fantastic reference. It more or less includes all of the things that really don't change on a very regular basis. It's all of the supporting regulations, the linkages, and the programs that are in place that more or less are in effect across all of the water supply plan areas. And so it does discuss a lot of the natural areas, conservation efforts, legal linkages, and those sorts of things. So please do peruse that document at your leisure. It's a great reference for all of the areas in the plan area. Next slide. So the overarching objectives of the plan, Tom mentioned what water supply plans do and don't do, but these are some of the main themes that we kind of have as we develop the plan. And of course, we're wanting to identify available water supplies that exist now and could be available in the future. Our planning horizon is out to 2045. So we are definitely forecasting to understand that those water supplies will be available in the future. At the same time, we're trying to increase water conservation and to encourage the development of alternative water supplies. All of this is taking place while we're trying to protect and enhance natural systems and to have compatibility with other efforts such as environmental restoration projects that are underway at a local level and a state level and a federal level. And also to provide linkages with local governments, because essentially as the plan becomes approved, there is an interaction with local governments that need to develop comprehensive plans to be able to have funding to be able to provide water supply to residents and agriculture in the future. So those are just some of the kind of themes that are going on here that you'll hear us talk about as we go through the presentation today. Next slide. So the order of my presentation is more or less going to go through the order of the chapters in the document, just so that as you're reading it, you're kind of getting, I'm going to give you today a quick overview of what's in each chapter. Of course, the introduction has some of the basics. Chapter 2 is very important. It's really our demand estimates, which sort of create the foundation of the water supply plan, is where we are, what water supply needs are now, and what they will be in 2025. So chapter 2 is a very important chapter, and actually there's also a supporting appendix. Appendix A has a lot of the nitty-gritty mathematics of those projections of water supply categories. Chapter 3 is the demand management. It's all about water conservation and projections of the potential for water savings. Chapter 4 is water resource protection, and those are the programs that we have in place to protect natural water resource systems. Chapter 5 is water source options, and that's essentially the palette of alternatives that we have to get water supply in the future. Water resource analysis is really a deep dive into the current state of affairs of the natural systems, surface water and groundwater, and what our projections are for water supply in the future coming to bear on those water resources. Chapter 7 are water resource development projects. These are things like the SERP projects that are creating new water, and environmental restoration projects that are developing a water source for the natural systems. Chapter 8 is water supply development projects. Now, these are projects that are primarily proposed by utilities in order to assure that the public utilities will be able to have the facilities in place in the future to provide the water that we know they'll be needing to by 2045. And then chapter 9, we wrap up with some conclusions and future recommendations and directions. And again, the appendices are there, water demand projections, public supply utility summaries. There's a nice profile of each of the utilities that are in the lower West Coast area, sort of a one-page summary. Chapter or Appendix C is all about minimum flows and levels and prevention strategies protecting natural systems. Chapter or Appendix D is it's a summary of all of the monitoring that we've got in place to assure that the health of the water resources are still valid and viable and will be in the future. And then Appendix E has profiles, about a one-page profile of each of the wastewater facilities that are operating in the lower West Coast area. So there's a lot of information in the document. And of course, as I mentioned, the support document is a separate publication, but it's got a lot of information about the basics of water supply aspects that are consistent across all of the planning areas. So a lot of information. I'm going to try and move through each of the chapters from here on out. Next slide, please. So in summary, the Lower West Coast planning area, our planning horizon for this update, our base year is 2020, and our future year is 2045. We're looking at a population that's been provided to us from the University of Florida Bureau of Economic and Business Research. It's looking like between 2020 and 2045, there's about a 36% increase in population, almost a little bit over 1.6 million residents will be living in the lower West Coast area by 2045. Agriculture is going to have a very modest increase as a result of some of the economics and the citrus industry having some difficult times. Very small increase in agricultural water needs. And overall, in summary, gross water demands from 2020 to 2045, there's going to be at about a 70% increase in water demands across all of the categories that we're going to talk about. And I'm sure the map on the right, you're all very familiar with this lower West Coast area. It's an area of a lot of urban area on the West Coast, but a lot of natural area within Collier County and a lot of agricultural area in eastern Lee County and Henry County and Glades County. Next slide, Tom. Yeah, so here's what's been happening in the lower West Coast area in terms of population growth. This is on the left is a picture of Naples, an aerial photograph of 1940. And of course, in 2021, you can see how humanity has encroached within this area. There's still remnants of natural systems across there, but certainly population has increased quite intensely, particularly along the coastlines in Naples, Bonita, Marco, Fort Myers, and Cape Coral, of course. And the map on the right more or less tells you what I just said. The blue area in the south is pretty much wetlands. A little bit of Everglades National Park is there. In Collier County, Thousand Islands, the Big Cypress Reserve is there. The blue area is what I'm talking about. The green, all of that green patterning is agriculture within the area. And then the intense reds and yellows along the coastline are all of the urban areas. So Lower West Coast Planning Area has a little bit or a lot of everything going on in it. It's really quite a fascinating area to have the pleasure to be working within. Next slide. So a little bit more about the population projections that we got from Bieber. The graphic on the left shows what the population projections used to be, starting back with the water supply plan. The blue line is where we thought population was going to be going during the 2008 water supply plan, and then progressing through the 2012 plan, the 2017 plan. And then the yellow bar is where we are projecting, or what University of Florida Bieber is projecting through 2045. And generally speaking, the curves have been flattening over the same time as a result of the economy and just general flattening of the growth trends over the last decades or so. And the graphic on the right is a profile of the utilities, the public supply utilities that are providing a large part of the population in this area. And you can see big chunks. Lee County utilities, Collier County utilities are the big providers. Cape Coral, of course, is right behind them. And then there are several utilities like Bonita Springs and Fort Myers and Naples that are certainly big players in the public utilities sector. And you know, by and large, I have to tell you that these utilities are run by engineering folks just like Jeff Pearson, very well run. You're well served by the folks that run these utilities in this area. Next slide. So a little bit about agriculture. It is actually the largest water consumer in the Lower West Coast Plan area. Predominant crops, citrus and sugarcane and fresh market vegetables. As I said earlier, the citrus industry is trying to grow, and we do have projections primarily provided by Department of Agriculture that say that there'll be an overall growth of water demand by 2045 of about 5%. And the map on the right is generally where the primary citrus production is produced. Sugarcane, of course, the light green, is in the area near Lake Okeechobee. And then you have the orange is where citrus currently is. And then non-agricultural, non-irrigated acreage is kind of in that sort of pale color. And then there's a smattering of fresh market vegetables and other crops in the area, but mostly citrus, sugarcane, and market vegetables are the big crops in this area. Next slide. So this is some information that actually has been provided to us by the Department of Agriculture. The graphics on the left are agricultural acreage in production in 2020, and the corresponding bars on the right are agricultural acreage that's projected in 2045. And if you let your eyeballs go from one bar to the other from 2020 to 2045, not an awful lot has really changed in terms of big changes in the types of crops that are going to be in production. In fact, visually, the category that actually has the most robust growth is the dark blue bar, which are the other categories, which include corn, potatoes, non-citrus fruits, greenhouse, and nursery crops. So the table on the bottom is sort of an interesting projection of those numbers from the Department of Agriculture. Going from 2020 to 2045, the FSED 8 in this plan shows us going from 291,000 acres to 2045 of 307,000 acres. 5 years ago, when we did the 2017 plan, if you look at the 2020 number, we were actually thinking from the get-go that there were going to be more agricultural acreages in production, which have not turned out to be the case. And the 2040 projections were actually higher than where we are projecting, or Department of Agriculture is projecting now for 2045. So you're really kind of seeing somewhat of a depressed market expansion of agriculture, although like I said, we're looking at about a 5% increase in water demand in that largest water use category. Next slide. Interestingly enough, landscape and recreational irrigation is the second largest water use category in the lower West Coast area. And this includes irrigation for landscape, lawns, golf courses, sporting fields, common areas, road medians, and landscape and recreational water growth is pretty much a strong correlation to the population growth. Like I said, population is anticipated to increase by about 36%. And we're looking at about that same expansion or demand in landscape and recreational water at about that same growth rate. The good news is that a lot of that water is provided by reclaimed water systems, like what Jeff was speaking about earlier. Next slide. So in summary, and this is all pretty much summarized in Chapter 2 of the document, we're seeing public water supply increase from 138 MGD to 186 MGD, again about a 36% increase in corresponding to the population growth. Domestic self-supply, those are the folks that are off of the public supply utilities. We're looking at a growth of about 36% on that. Agriculture, which is the largest water use category in the area, is going to have a relatively modest increase from 529 or 592 MGD to 621. And then commercial and landscape and power generation, it all basically sums up from going from a total in each category of a million or 1.13 million gallons a day to about 1,081 million gallons a day. And that's a total increase of about 17% from 2020 to 2045. One interesting point, again, comparing to what we thought was going to happen 5 years ago, the column on the right are the projections that we had made 5 years ago as to what the water demand was going to be in 2040. And you can see that 5 years ago, we were projecting 1,210 million gallons a day in the previous Lower West Coast plan. And the projections that we are making now for 2045 are actually lower than the total demands that we projected 5 years ago. And that, that kind of speaks to the flattening of the curve of population. It seems like as we've been making these water projections, the overall curves seem to be flattening. We had been predicting in the previous couple of water supply plan updates a little bit of a stiffer, higher growth rate in demand. And actually, as it turns out, compared to 5 years ago, we are seeing a flattening in the demand. And that's a function of conservation ethic. I'm going to actually talking about that next, I think. Next slide, please. Yeah, funny how that works. Chapter 3 in the document is all about water conservation. And you can see this is the per capita usage of the public supply sector of water demand. And from 2000 to 2020, we've seen a fairly substantial, a 30% decrease in per capita water usage across all of the utilities in the Lower West Coast area. So, I think it's quite a success story about conservation ethic that the residents, the citizens in this area have really been able to embrace. Agriculture, of course, is doing best management practices and have been installing more efficient irrigation systems. Of course, water for agriculture is a cost for them. Generally speaking, energy, they require energy to have to push water onto their crops. So the less water that they use, it saves farmers money. So I think agriculture has had a conservation ethic already in place over time that they've just been living with. Public supply, indoor and outdoor programs, conservation rate structures are in place. All of these things have resulted in the success that we've observed. Now, having said that, my observations of maybe the last three bars on here, 2010, 2015, and 2020, the conservation, the per capita rate has kind of flattened out. So it seems to me like we're ready for the next big push in water conservation in the Lower West Coast area. In fact, Chapter 3 has a very interesting analysis of if there were to be more expansion of the conservation programs across the area. They've got a model, a conservation model that is described in the chapter. That's very helpful. And what they're saying is that if we actually got about a 30% participation in some of the programs that are still available out there, we could have a decrease in urban water use of about 30 MGD by 2045. And in agriculture, about a 15% decrease in water demand. So we do have a ways to go, and I'm hopeful to see that in the future. Again, it's actually a very interesting chapter. I would encourage you to take a look at it when you have time. Next slide. Water resource protection. Now, this is a big deal. These are all of the mechanisms that we have in place to protect water resources. And we have actually multiple overlapping means by which to protect water resources. The first bullet is, of course, water use permitting. When anybody wants to come in to apply for a water use, they have to demonstrate that that water use is in the public interest, that it's reasonable and beneficial. And anyone who's applied for a water use permit at the district knows that there are several questions and technical demonstrations that they need to make in order to assure that that water use is appropriate and in the interest of the state. In addition to that, we have what are called restricted allocation areas. And there is a restricted allocation area for the area around Lake Okeechobee. It's the Lake Okeechobee service area. It's that green hatched area around Lake Okeechobee and the connecting surface water bodies that you can see. That green hatched area extends quite a ways along the course of the C-43 Canal throughout Henry County and actually into Lee County. Minimum flows and levels, MFLs, they're established. That's the diagonal stripes on the map area. We have minimum flows and levels established for lower West Coast aquifers, the Sandstone, the Tamiami, and the Mid-Hawthorne aquifer that doesn't allow or protects those aquifers from having a decline in groundwater levels that does not damage the aquifer. And we also have an MFL that's established for the Caloosahatchee River, 457 CFS, I believe is what the number is for the Caloosahatchee River. And then water reservations exist for projects that we've been building for the environment. Water reservation is essentially for a project that creates water, that water is actually reserved for the environment, and it protects that volume of water from anyone being able to essentially tap into it. It's a water that's reserved for the natural system. And we've got water reservations that are formally in place for the C-43 reservoir project. That is that gray rectangular box there on the south side of the C-43 Canal. And also the Fakahatchee Estuary and the Picayune Strand project that we're getting close to being finalized presently. So that chapter 4 goes into great detail on what those protections are and how they're implemented and what they mean. It's really a great chapter to understand. When we have a water supply project like this, where we're projecting demands, I think one of the first questions that get asked very commonly is, what are we doing while we look at these increases in demands? What mechanisms are in place to protect the natural systems? And this map says it all, quite honestly. So please take a look at that chapter on water resource protections. It's really quite a read, if I do say so myself. Sorry. Okay, water resource development. These are the projects that we have in place that are actually trying to create water resources, new water. And the map on the right, of course, is a scatter plot. It looks like a Jackson Pollock painting of all of the projects that we actually have in place ongoing throughout the district. We're all doing a lot of work on the implementation of the Comprehensive Everglades Restoration Project, which in partnership with our federal sponsor, the Army Corps of Engineers. Although beyond SERP, there are several state initiatives that are underway. The South Florida Water Management District, we have our groundwater modeling group and our hydrogeologists are constantly in efforts to investigate and assess water resources in the surface water and in the groundwater environment. And then we also have several programs like alternative water supply funding that we are able to fund projects that help in water supply and conservation programs. So that's just all of the different efforts that are in place to save water, create water, and assess water resources throughout the district. And the chapter in this really goes into depth on those programs that are in place within the lower West Coast area. Next slide. So after we go through all of that and we have our prognostication of what water supply demands are going to be, what we do next is kind of look at the water source options. What is the palette of water sources that we can look at to meet those future demands? And of course, there's reclaimed water, surface water reservoirs, surface water, seawater, water conservation, saline groundwater, fresh groundwater, and subsurface storage like ASR. So Chapter 5 kind of deals with those sources and what is the status of each of those sources within the lower West Coast area. Next slide. And how we parse this out is to look at each water supply category on the left side, public supply, domestic, agricultural, landscape, and rec. And amongst the water source options, which source options actually work for those categories. So for instance, in public supply, obviously, fresh groundwater would be a water source that they would want to use. Brackish groundwater and storage water for meeting water supply demands. Those are the water source categories that kind of best fit. For domestic supply, somebody that's building their own house and drilling a well to provide themselves with potable water, of course, they're going to need just fresh groundwater primarily for their own domestic use. For agriculture, agriculture could certainly use surface water if it's available. Fresh groundwater, of course, and water storage if they can create a reservoir and impoundment. Those are the options that are really best suited for agriculture. For landscape and rec, you can use almost any one of these combinations: surface water, fresh groundwater, brackish groundwater, reclaimed water, or storage. Almost the same with commercial and industrial. And power generation can use surface water, fresh groundwater, and reclaimed water. So that's just kind of a graphic that tells you what water source just pretty fits best with what those categories are. Next slide. Here's a little bit about groundwater sources, which are the primary sources for much of the public supply. The graphic on the left is a geologic cross-section naming the various aquifers that are available in the lower West Coast area. Starting at the top, the water table aquifer primarily contains fresh groundwater, although it's separated by what's called the lower Tamiami aquifer that has fresh water in it, but sometimes it can also have brackish water. And then a little bit deeper is the sandstone aquifer, which primarily has brackish water within it. And then down at depths of maybe 300 or 400 feet is the mid-Hawthorne aquifer, which has brackish water in it. And then the Floridan aquifer, which many of the utilities have now completed supply wells in, has brackish water also. And ASR wells, when they're constructed, primarily are in the upper part of the Floridan aquifer, if not the lower confining bed. And the map on the right is a very interesting map of the wells that are completed within each of the aquifer systems. And you can see just by the patterns of colors that are on the map that the aquifers are productive in some areas and either not present or not very productive in other areas. You can see in Cape Coral, for instance, on the east side, the Mid-Hawthorne Aquifer, the red dots are all wells that are completed in the Mid-Hawthorne Aquifer, or the orange dots are the water table aquifer. But as you go south from Cape Coral and Fort Myers, all of a sudden you see purple and orange. The lower Tamiami Aquifer is present there and is the best water producer in that area. So it really is quite variable within the lower West Coast Aquifer. The aquifers themselves, they vary in thickness and in transmissivity and productivity. And you can see that on the map that there are definitely discrete areas that the aquifers can be utilized and areas where they're not. Next slide. So a little bit more about public supply and groundwater use. This is a fascinating graphic on the right. The purple line that's crossing all of the bars is the population in the lower West Coast area. And over this time period from 2005 to 2020, population in the lower West Coast area has increased by about 30% in people. The bars, the colored bars, are actually the water sources that have provided that population increase. And the gray bars on the bottom are the Surficial Aquifer. The dark blue bars in the middle are the intermediate aquifer. And the light blue bars are the Floridan Aquifer. And over time, you can see that actually the Floridan Aquifer usage has pretty much increased over time, a little bit more in the intermediate aquifer, but water use from the Surficial Aquifer has really not increased all that much. So there's been a good diversity in the water sources that have met this demand of population. And also, even though the population has actually increased by 30%, you can see that actually water demand has not really increased all that much over time. In fact, from 2016 or 17 through 2020, water demands have really not increased as much. And, I think it's a function of the conservation ethic that's in place here. Conservation and the use of reclaimed water and substituting the demand from the aquifers itself. Next slide. So this actually is a little bit about reclaimed water usage in the lower West Coast area. The graphic on the left tracks reclaimed water demand from 1994 up through 2020. And you can see that there's been an increase of about 50 million gallons a day of reclaimed water that's provided in this area. The maps on the right show what Lee County looks like. You can see the very intensive reclaimed water system that Cape Coral has implemented and all of the reclaimed water pipelines that extend throughout Fort Myers and into Bonita Springs and eastern Lee County, nicely interconnected systems. And on the map on the right is Collier County and Hendry County. Naples and Collier County have done a nice job of expanding their water systems too. They've had very aggressive reclaimed water system expansions over time. Next slide. So not everything is roses. There are some areas that we've been observing have had a decline in groundwater levels. The map on the right are areas of very intense domestic use in the area, particularly in Lee County, Lehigh Acres, Cape Coral, and Fort Myers area specifically, where domestic self-supply combined with agriculture and an intense domestic supply wells have created localized areas where groundwater levels are depressed. The Mid-Hawthorne Aquifer in Cape Coral has experienced that decline, although as Jeff was speaking, they have a very aggressive system of utility expansion. that we're certainly expecting that groundwater levels will rebound in the graphics that Jeff showed once that utility expansion does take place, and many of the domestic wells will come offline. And in the sandstone aquifer in Lehigh Acres, again, this is a big area of domestic self-supply and nearby agricultural uses. We're in the process of trying to coordinate with the counties to try to determine some of the best options for trying to minimize or reduce the number of domestic wells that are going to be taking place over the future in this area. So we've got some work to do in these areas, and there is ongoing coordination to try to protect the aquifers that are being intensely used in those areas. Next slide. So while we're doing all this, we have a bevy of groundwater modelers that are in place. And what we do is we build groundwater models to look at what the state of the groundwater system is currently. And then we project what future demands are going to be in terms of creating a drawdown of what those aquifers are going to be like in the future. And we have two very large models that have been working in parallel, been in development for years actually, that did culminate before, in the year before we started this plan this year. We had two models, the Surficial and Intermediate Aquifer model, and that groundwater model takes into account conditions within the water table aquifer, the lower Tamiami aquifer, the sandstone aquifer, and the mid-Hawthorne aquifer. And then the West Coast Floridan model looked at primarily the Floridan aquifer, the upper part of the Floridan aquifer, the lower Hawthorne aquifer, and the middle portion of the Floridan aquifer. And like I said, both of those models were completed about a year ago, and we've got the conclusions and those modeling efforts are within Chapter 7 of the document itself and the supporting appendix. In fact, we have, in addition to what's briefly concluded in the water supply plan at the web page, we also have the model reports that are very extensive deep dives into the constructions of the models and how they were built and what the scenarios were run. But I'm just going to give you the Reader's Digest version on the next slide here. Lower West Coast model, we actually call it the Lower West Coast Surficial and Intermediate model, was a mod flow based model. We ran scenarios that went from 2020 to 2040 and indicated that the 2040 demands could be met without undue impacts on the water resources, again in the Surficial, the sandstone, the water table, and the intermediate aquifer. Although there were some areas where there would be declines, as I just described, in areas of intense domestic self-supply, but water levels are anticipated to rebound in Cape Coral when the utility expands its service area. But generally speaking, the aquifers are going to be able to provide the water that the demands indicate are going to need to be available. The West Coast Floridan aquifer is a CWAP-based model for those folks that know about groundwater models. Again, based on the planning projections with well field management, the 2040 model results indicated that there would be no significant adverse impacts on increased water demands for the Floridan aquifer through 2040. And again, the comparison for both models was from a base year of 2014 through 2040. But as I'd stated earlier, our demands for 2045 are actually less than the demands that we projected 5 years ago. So even though these models are indicating we're run on a 2040 scenario, those scenarios actually were anticipating more groundwater use than we are now projecting for 2045. So we think that the results from the model are conservative and are indicative that the water resources are there and available for demands in 2045. Next slide. Some of the other efforts that we have underway, we evaluate on a 5-year basis the saltwater intrusion lines that are available. This is a publication that we did, I guess back in 2020. I think we assessed all of these wells, and actually more than 1,000 monitor wells, I think, were ultimately utilized in this assessment of the 2029 location of the saltwater interface. And of course, we actually look at 4 different aquifers that the saltwater interface is mappable within the area: the water table aquifer, the lower Tamiami aquifer, the sandstone, and the mid-Hawthorne aquifer. So those maps that you're seeing actually plot the updates from 2009, 2014, and 2019. And if you just let your eyeball kind of wander on where those lines are, the pink line, the blue line, and the hatched line, you can generally see that the saltwater interface is generally not moving all that much on that 5-year interval of what where the maps show. Although there are general incursions that we see over time, the saltwater interface is essentially stable, but certainly we're recommending that we continue monitoring the interface, since it certainly is of interest to us, particularly with sea level rise occurring. Next slide. So the conclusions, again, about the saltwater interface mapping, the interface is definitely dynamic. It's advancing and retreating depending on pumpage. It is occurring and it does move around locally, laterally. What is important is that well field management for those well fields that are taking water from each of these aquifers in the vicinity of the coastline. It's imperative that they are vigilant about well field monitoring and management of not over pumping the wells that are tapping those aquifers. Certainly localized monitoring is important, and our models actually, the groundwater models, the lower West Coast Surficial and intermediate aquifer model, the analysis that was done on the saltwater interface indicated that groundwater levels and the resource is sustainable in those areas, although diversification to alternative water supplies is certainly encouraged. Next slide. And with regard to sea level rise and climate change, the district has really ramped up our efforts on trying to become cognizant of climate change and sea level rise. Obviously, South Florida is quite vulnerable. The rate of sea level rise has been predicted to accelerate. We've been conducting research and performing simulations. We will be developing groundwater models that anticipate sea level rise in the future. Just recently, there are 2 publications that we've generated. There's a publication available now on the website on resiliency metrics, climate resiliency metrics. And then there's also a sea level rise and flood resiliency plan that was published, a draft plan that is actually out there right now for public review. I certainly encourage everyone on this call to take a look at that document and provide comment. I think the deadline is maybe out in another month or 2. So we are certainly engaged and coordinating with other state and local agencies on climate change and resiliency. Next slide. So Chapter 8 is all about the proposed projects that utilities are proposing in order to meet those future demands. several utilities have proposed and are proposing projects. 6 of the utilities are actually proposing projects that'll increase their capacity by about 25 million gallons a day. However, almost all of the utilities currently have sufficient capacity to already meet their 2045 demands. So as I said before, the utilities are in your area are quite well run and have already anticipated those future demands by the plant capacities that they already have in place. And as it turns out, really only one utility actually needs to implement a project in order to meet their 2045 demands. So I think the utilities are in good shape for meeting public water supply demands. And for non-potable water, it's primarily reclaimed water. You can see 18 projects proposed by 9 utilities are actually going to increase the capacity for non-potable water, essentially reclaimed water, by 40 million gallons a day by 2045. So the utilities have plans in place to put a lot of new water online. So I think the residents in this area are in good hands. Next slide. It's just a summary of the projects, kind of splitting it out a little bit more into the projects that have been proposed in the plan. There's one project that's actually proposed in the Surficial Aquifer system, and demands in the Surficial Aquifer system are very limited because of wetlands and saltwater intrusion concerns. So there's not a lot of expansion, proposed expansion of water tapping the Surficial Aquifer system. As you can see, there are eight of the 9 projects are all anticipated to be completed in the Floridan Aquifer. And then for those non-potable projects, as I had said, most of them, 17 out of 18 projects, are reclaimed water projects that are going to be providing almost another 40 million gallons a day of reclaimed water in this area. And then there's one ASR project that's also anticipated. So the utilities are really on the ball with planning for future projects to provide the water demands for the public. Next slide. So wrapping things up, in conclusion, we are certainly encouraging the implementation of Surficial, intermediate, and Floridan aquifer monitoring, water conservation, development of alternative water supply, and wanting to see the completion of the SERP projects. Obviously, we are evaluating and designing solutions in response to sea level rise. No question about implementing management measures for the intermediate and Floridan aquifer, and coordinating with local agencies, tribal governments, and utilities on their water supply elements. Pretty straightforward. A conclusion in the plan is that future water supply and ecosystem needs of the region can continue to be met through 2045 with appropriate management, conservation, and implementation of the projects in this plan. There is a project, one utility project, as I just mentioned, needs to provide, to build one project in order to meet their 2045 demand. And of course, implementation of SERP projects, C43, Picayune, and the other ecosystem restoration projects. Next slide. So that's the short story. Sorry about that. I hope that kind of gives you an encouragement to read the document. Just because I said everything that I said doesn't mean that you can't read the document too. It goes into a lot more detail, and we certainly would love to hear your comments on what we're including in the plan, in the draft plan, actually. So with that, you can open it up to some questions, comments.
You see Peter Hill has his hand raised.
Yes, good afternoon. That was fascinating. would you like to comment on one aspect of which is the aspect of stormwater management? It's all well and good to say that demand is going to be adequate to 2045. What about the management, i.e., flooding of stormwaters?
Hi, this is Mark Elsner. I'm the Bureau Chief of the Water Supply Bureau. And this plan is focused on water supply. And there's other efforts within the district that are addressing stormwater and SERP and things like that. But as a general comment, one thing regarding stormwater is looking at ways to go ahead and keep that on the land, not flooding, but maintain it for aquifer recharge, and especially at the end of the wet season. And work that's been done in the Big Cypress Basin in Collier County has shown that by just raising the structures at the end of the wet season to retain some of that water for groundwater recharge raises groundwater levels. And over that area is many, many acre feet of water as we go into the dry season. And so I don't think it answered your question directly, but this plan is directed towards water supply.
I accept that. I mean, it's part and parcel of what you're trying to do here, and I totally respect it. But this whole problem is one of integration, is it not? And whilst the population grows, we do put more and more concrete between the rainfall and the aquifer systems, and that does raise the whole spectrum of stormwater management.
And we have a regulation department also that deals with permitting and future growth of development. When a developer comes in and wants to add a residential community, they have to meet stormwater permitting criteria that would prevent flooding and capture the runoff from the impervious areas and store it in a lake system, typically, that would attenuate any flooding issues. They have to meet different storm events, a 1 in 100-year storm event, and be able to hold that water for treatment, water quality treatment, before it discharges to a larger system and eventually to the ocean. So there are other parts of the agency that are involved in that effort.
It is a good point, though, Mr. Hill, and it is a balance, and balancing the missions that we have in front of us.
Agreed. I mean, I don't want to take away from, I think, the very laudable work and the very scientific work and the detail that has gone on here. I mean, it is very reassuring. But the whole issue of stormwater management is something that we all face and populations face.
Agreed. Thank you.
Well, thank you. That was excellent. Excellent.
Okay. Next hand raised is John Cassani.
Hi again, and thanks. I noticed that you emphasized and quantified groundwater use within the context of both public water supply and domestic self-supply. And I apologize if I missed it, but I didn't see the same kind of analysis for agricultural groundwater withdrawals, particularly in LOSA, where the restricted allocation does not apply to groundwater. So I'm hoping, again, apologize if I missed it. I hope the document quantifies that element, since agricultural is the biggest consumer of water in the lower West Coast. It'd be good to see that. And thank you for your presentation.
Yeah, we do have those. We do have those numbers, actually, John. In Chapter 2, we've got the quantity of groundwater that supplies agriculture in the lower West Coast area. And groundwater does provide for some amount of agricultural pumpage. By and large, the largest share is in surface water and the connected water bodies with Lake O. But yeah, groundwater does provide some agricultural use, and we do have it in the appendices of the document.
Great to see some usage quantification, not just total consumption, but use trends through time would be, I think, relevant.
All right, thanks, John. Next, we have Brad Cornell. Hi, Brad.
Hi, this is Brad Cornell with Audubon Western Everglades and Audubon, Florida. Bob, Tom, and Mark, thanks for the great presentations. This is really useful, and we will be providing some written comments on the plan and the draft update that you've shared with us. I just wanted to raise one issue relative to the Surficial and Intermediate Aquifer model that, Bob, you were just going through. And that is that we've, at Corkscrew Swamp Sanctuary, in conjunction with support of the Big Cypress Basin, as you know, we've completed our own hydrologic modeling exercise that has illuminated some issues with groundwater declines and degradation. So in the Corkscrew Regional Ecosystem Watershed and the 13,000 acre Corkscrew Swamp Sanctuary itself, we're seeing since 2020, we're seeing some pretty, since 2000, the last 20 years, we're seeing some significant degradation in dry season water table levels. So much so that our deepest wetlands are drying down well below ground surface every winter, almost every single winter. And the model indicates that a combination of public water supply, domestic self-supply, and agricultural irrigation pumping has a significant impact on the water levels at Corkscrew Swamp Sanctuary. So and the water supply.
Brad, you're breaking up a little bit, Brad. Still not hearing you very well at all.
Thank you.
Okay, I heard thank you at the end, but we lost you a little bit there. But thank you for your comments, and we look forward to your written comments on the planning documents. So thank you.
Okay, next up is James Peters.
Yes, good afternoon, gentlemen. Thanks very much. Very informative. This is James Peters. I'm with the Showerpot Foundation right here in South Florida. Been in South Florida for 32 years. Most of the information we've received is about over the last decade and projecting into the next couple of decades. Water conservation has been number one or number two, or certainly number two in the summation. And I'd like to propose or ask about the general public, the engagement of the general public. It looks to me like in this whole thing, the general public are encouraged simply by higher prices and increased fines, larger fines. And my observation over the last 10 years is that really hasn't done an awful lot to the reduction of public consumption. I realize that some education and awareness is effective, and I think it's great. I know that there's some great campaigns to encourage people to decrease the use of potable water, and you called it the expensive water. I wanted to share that over the last 12 years, Right here in South Florida, in the South Florida Water Management District, we produce the world's first recycling bins for water, manufactured right in North America from recycled recycling bins. I'd like to propose that we further consider, and Jeff, you've met me and asked for a sample, and I'm sorry I wasn't able to give you one at the time, but I do have them now. I would like to suggest that we include and encourage the general public by introducing recycling bins for water. I live in the areas, I was in Cape Coral when they literally ran out and people were up in arms that they hadn't been able to shower or flush their toilet in several weeks. I attended the meeting and the summation was charge everybody $4,000 to $6,000 to fix their lawn sprinklers. I really don't think that 10 or 20 years more of the same is going to make a big difference. I agree. It's interesting with the reuse, reclaimed water, the purple pipes and things. And I've been in areas where they have that. I'm afraid, from my observation, is that it brings the perception that you can water limitlessly. And I think that's just the problem in Lehigh Acres and Fort Myers when people are on wells. Lower education, misperception that water is limitless and they go to town on it, not realizing they're drawing from the same aquifers. So I'd really like to ask anybody that would like to reach out, showerpot.org or me directly. I'd be happy to give my telephone number if I may. It's area code 561-929-7773. I'd be happy to get samples out to anybody. Jeff, I'll get you your samples as requested about a year ago, I guess, when we met in Cape Coral. I really believe public engagement, public encouragement, we've even gamified this, so there's incentives. I really think employing everybody, the adage of I'd rather 1% of 100 people's efforts than 100% of one people's efforts. I'm here, it's local, it's made domestically. I've lived here for 32 years. Let's introduce them. If nothing more in a finite area, and encourage the general public to get engaged, and then they're more receptive to not only to conserve, but of the need to upgrade systems and just become that much more cooperative when you engage people. And I believe in summation, the last thing is that most people, given an opportunity to do a little bit of good and become part of the solution rather than problem, will do that. And I challenge that can make a huge difference. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Peters. Okay, I don't think we have any more hands raised. I'll pause for a little bit if anyone has some last minute technical issues. You can *6 if you're calling on a phone. *9 raises your hand in the Zoom feature. Anybody? No? Okay.
Next steps.
Okay, so I'll close with some next steps. So here you see the dates that we have for bringing our plan in for a landing in November. November 10th, we plan to bring the final plan to our governing board for consideration. We have there the deadline for public written comments from the public, October 5th. We'll also make a trip over to the Big Cypress Basin Board at the end of October. And one last thing, Bobby touched on it actually, but it bears repeating. There is a regional and local planning linkage. Approval of the plan triggers a requirement for local governments to amend their comprehensive plan to update their 10-year water facilities work plan within 18 months of plan approval. So that would be May of 2024, assuming that the governing board approves the plan in November. There's also a requirement that utilities provide annual progress reports to us, and we have a database available. We coordinate with the utilities every year, excuse me, to have that done. So that's all we have for today for the workshop. Another opportunity, if there's any thoughts or questions, feel free to *9 and raise your hand. No, no one? Okay. Well, again, thank you to our presenters, our panelists. I believe our governing board member, Charlotte Roman, was joined for most of the workshop as well. We appreciate you participating in today's workshop. As a reminder, in a few days, the workshop recording will be made available on the district's website. Thank you again for participating today. If anyone needs the web page, it's sfwmd.gov/LWC plan. Also, Bob's email is there. You can email him with your written comments. This presentation in its entirety is also posted on the same web page for the Lower West Coast Plan.
And the recording will also...
The recording will be made available on the district's YouTube webpage in a day or two, I think. So thank you, everyone, very much for your attendance and comments. Have a good day.